Hey guys, this is Colin at ShiftSynth1. Today's going to be a little bit of a different lesson because we're going to be covering the session section today. And the session section is only in the Pro editor, in the Midisynth circuit editor. And as you can see, I've found myself with a little bit of extra space here because it compresses the windows. So I've decided to split the screen with the Midisynth circuit editor as well as the Pro editor, so we can get a look at both of these avenues and I can show you the differences between the two. I also want to point out that this is where we start to diverge from the Pro editor and the Midisynth circuit editor. Now I have the standalone editor here on my screen, but if you have the tablet version, the functionality is essentially the same. So if you have the tablet version of the Midisynth circuit editor, then you will also benefit from this tutorial. So we're here in the session view of the Midisynth circuit editor and the Pro editor. You have to click on these. So if you're in the full view, you'll have to click on the session tab here. Now what I want to point out here is that a lot of this functionality is actually within the circuit itself. I know that we covered in our tutorials that a few of these parameters will adjust with the circuit itself, mainly the macro positions as well as the octave. In the session view, a lot more of the parameters interact directly with the circuit parameters. So you can turn a knob in the circuit and it will reflect on the screen. And I'll go over those. This will actually go relatively quickly because the functionality of the circuit, I think a lot of people have studied from the circuit manual. So I'm not going to go too deeply into the functionality of the areas that are contained within the circuit. I'm going to try to focus on the areas that are unique to the circuit editor. Now I'm going to do a whole series on the circuit itself. So when those come around, if you're like, I don't know how he got there, I don't know what he's doing, I will do a whole YouTube series on the hardware of the Novation circuit, and you'll learn all about that there. So getting started, we have a section for reverb. Now if you're on the circuit, reverb is in the FX section, so I'm going to go there, and it's the pair colored row here. Now this is actually a kind of a strange area of the Novation circuit. In order to access the reverb setting, you actually have to click on a reverb. So then your knobs up here will be switched to reverb. Now if you look, synth 1 here as well as the synth level in the Midisynth circuit editor are going to adjust now that I've assigned the reverb to the macro knobs. Alright, so let's try that out. Alright, so as you can see, these parameters here are adjusting. And it's the same for synth 1, synth 2, which is knob 3, drum 1, which is knob 5, drum 2, which is knob 6, drum 3, which is knob 7, and drum 4, which is knob 8. So that's reverb. The same applies to delay. Delay are the pink pads. So you have to press the pink key, which is now going to change your setting, and it's exactly the same. You can see delay now is being adjusted. So that's this section right here. It's simply the amount of FX applied to all of your instruments. So refocusing on reverb, you have a drop down here, and these are simply just types of reverb going from the smallest type of room to a hall, the largest type of room. And it's just the way the reverb sounds. I'm not going to go too deeply into these because I just use my ears and I go with whatever sounds best for the current track that I'm working on. Remember that reverb has to be applied across the entire circuit. You can choose which instruments have reverb applied to them, but you can't choose unique types of reverb to be applied across the instrument. So keep that in mind when you're choosing reverb type and delay type. Actually, I'm going to set this to Great Hall to give us a really big reverb. I'm going to turn up reverb really high here. Now I want to show you guys real quick what I have going on at the synth 1. I've just got quarter notes on an initialized patch. On drum 1, I've got a few kick drums hitting here. And that's not going to change. I also have, if I go to patterns and choose synth 1 here, you'll see that I have a sustain note here, and that's going to be used for something later on. So if I go back to patterns, I'm going to go back to synth 1 and select that first pad, and I'm going to press play here just to test the sound. Okay, so that's what that sounds like. So let's get some reverb going on here. Oh, I already applied some. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to turn the reverb all the way up, and I'm going to press play. I'm going to do Great Hall. Okay, so you can really start to hear it here. Decay is basically adjusting the size of the room. So if I turn up Decay, it turns very beehive-ish because the sound is bouncing like crazy off of this giant hall. Damp is actually dampening the sound. So if I had to readjust damp there, but basically it will cut down on the reverb that I have going through Decay. So if I turn damp up, you'll hear that beehive start coming back until I max it. So that's reverb. Mixer here is just the sound levels of your synths. And that can be accessed by going to the mixer and then adjusting knob 1 and knob 3 here. So knob 1 is synth 1, so if you look on the screen here, synth 1 here and synth 1 here are going to be adjusted when I turn macro knob 1. Same with synth 2, which is on knob 3. I want to point out that while I'm here, the 4 drums, which are 5, 6, 7, and 8, are actually included in the drum section. You can see the level here, right? So just to show you, drum 1 is being adjusted. The level is actually here in the Midisynth circuit editor. And I'm not going to go into the rest of them because they align up pretty simply. This frequency is actually the global frequency knob here, the big one. So let me play it for you. So this is like the knob most people play with when they first start the circuit. So if I turn this one way, it's going to be a low pass filter, and if I turn it the other way, it's going to be a high pass filter. So I'm just going to turn it, and you can see it adjusting on the frequency. You can also see it here on the Midisynth circuit editor. And if I turn it up, it's going to be a high pass filter. So I'm going to turn this down to a low pass filter because I want to show you what the global resonance does. So you'll only really hear the resonance if the filter is being applied, but it basically will add a resonance to your filter. So let me turn this up. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility. That resonance is not available on the circuit itself. You have to adjust it either in the Midisynth circuit editor or the Pro editor. So just a heads up. Okay, I'm going to turn this off. Delay is another FX. If I go back here, it's the pink rows. So time is only available if sync is off. So I'm going to turn sync off here. And then I'm actually I'm just going to play around with it in the Midisynth circuit editor because I've been playing around a lot on the Pro editor, and I want to show you guys how the Midisynth looks. So I'm going to turn these off all the way, and I'm going to turn up the knob on the circuit for synth 1, and I'm going to press play here. You can already hear a difference if I turn it off and turn it back on. The time will add a delay between the echo. So it sounds very metallic right now because the delay is hitting exactly on the same beat as my synth. So if I increase this time, let me turn this off real quick. It's going to play out. So what was happening there was while I was adjusting the delay real time, it was warping the sound because I was changing the delay while it was being delayed. So if I press play now, it's a lot more stable delay. It's really delayed, but it's a lot more stable than it was. Okay, let me turn this back down. Delay here, this drop down, gives you the option to adjust the left-right ratio of the delay, so where it ping-pongs back and forth between the stereo. And while I'm on that drop down, width here adjusts the width of the stereo delay. So if I press play here, and I turn up the time a little bit, let me see what happens. I believe the default for width is max. So I'm going to turn that max, and if I reduce this, it will compress that delay field. So if you're not using stereo headphones, that might be a little bit difficult to hear, but it basically reduces the stereo field space between the delays if you turn width down. Alright, so I'm going to turn width all the way up again to give us a lot more clear idea of the delay here. Feedback is a simple feedback system. It's going to route the delay back into the system before being delayed again. Let me turn up time, and I'm going to adjust the feedback here. It just really intensifies that delay. Okay, and sync is similar to time, except instead of time being independent of the Novation circuit's internal clock, it sets the delay onto the Novation circuit clock. All right, so if you have sync on, the time setting is turned off. Right, so let me turn the time off just so I don't confuse you guys, and I'm going to turn up the sync. And you can hear that the changes are very rigid. Now, that's because they don't provide you a drop down like they do in the various sync functions of the editor. It's just a circular adjuster. But really, you can think about it as toggling through one of the drop-down menus. You just can't see what it is that you're picking. So just use your ears, pick the sync that sounds best, or adjust it manually with time. You know, go with whatever sounds good. Slew basically smooths any modulation done to time. So if you remember, when I was adjusting time, it was warping the sound and making it sound kind of bad at times. If you turn slew all the way up, it will help to mitigate some of those weird sonic adjustments that happen when you modulate time real time. So let me show you guys an example here. So if I turn off slew and turn up time really quickly, let me turn up the feedback here. Yeah, it doesn't really sound that great. So let me turn up the slew this time. Yeah, so it sounds a lot better. It's smoothing that delay adjustment. Let me turn that off. So you might say, well, okay, but I have no intention of adjusting the delay when I'm performing. There's no way to do that on the Novation circuit. I'd have to do that on the editor, and even if I'm working on the iPad, adjusting the time seems like a pain. I'm not really sure how I'm going to incorporate that. And it's a good point. I just want to point out that there are several ways to incorporate parameters into your performance using the Midisynth circuit editor. Now, you can't do this on the Pro editor, but the Midisynth circuit editor has a few performance capabilities where you can assign parameters to an XY axis as well as a adjuster. I'll just show you guys really quick what that looks like. It's on the Performance tab. So if I click Performance here, you can see an XY axis as well as several performance macro adjusters, and those can be freely assigned to parameters. So don't write off the time and slew rate quite yet. I'm going to go into those a lot more in detail in a few lessons from now. I'm going to cover the elements of the Midisynth circuit editor that you don't get in the Pro editor, but I just wanted to make you guys aware of that. There is opportunity to use the slew rate. Sidechain is an element in music production. It is often used in electronic dance music. It's actually frequently used in pop music now too. It's kind of working its way into the music production world. So they were nice enough to include a sidechain feature here. It's the buttons right next to the synths. It's similar to the other FX section where there's presets, but you're allowed to adjust those in the Pro Editor and the Midisynth circuit editor. The circuit itself, the default is set to only drum 1. Usually a sidechain will duck the audio to bring out the kick drum. They want you to assign the kick to drum 1 and then use the sidechain to bring out that kick. So let's see what that sounds like just using the default. If I pick the last default setting here, it'll be a really clear kick. But first, I'm going to change the synth to this second pattern. This is a hold. And now what that'll do is show the sidechain very clearly because it'll duck that hold audio and bring out the kick. So let me show you what that sounds like without any sidechain. Okay, so if I turn to the last setting here, in the circuit editor, you can adjust which drum the sidechain is coming from, which is really useful. You can choose 1 through 4. And you can do a different sidechain for each of the synths, which is pretty great. I want you to think of the sidechain as an amp envelope that kicks in mid-sound, okay? So the attack is not the attack to get to full volume, it's the attack to get to no volume at all. I actually turned off sidechain here, right? So beware when you do that. You want to, if you have settings here, pressing the red button on your circuit will negate any of those, right? So if, say, I have a few of these settings set up and I press this red button, no more sidechain is going to be applied to my sound. So you got to bring the depth to 0 and then back up again. So just make sure you're aware of that. So I'm going to take these all to 0. Depth is the severity of the sidechain. Okay, so I'm going to take attack up here so we have some sidechain, and I'm going to slowly bring up the depth to show you guys what I'm talking about. Okay, so that's what depth does. Now, attack is the time it takes for the audio to finish ducking. And all of this happens extremely quickly. So it's kind of hard to tell. You got to spend some time with the sidechain and figure out what each of these means. But attack is the amount of time it takes to valley. Hold is the amount of time the duck stays ducked. And decay is the amount of time it takes for that audio level to return to normal. So I'm going to keep hold 0 and I'm going to turn decay up all the way. So that should be a triangular valley. So let's see what that sounds like. It's dropping to 0 and then coming back up. Right. So that's what that is. So now if I increase hold, so let's play this again, but now I'm going to fade in a hold here. Now the sidechain is so intense that it's not returning to the maximum level. Refer to my manual. I've got a nice little graph in there to further explain this. It's hard to play with because these parameters are not linear. There's definite sweet spots with sidechaining, and they happen near the top of the parameter. Now, with the drums, I'm not going to cover these sections too much. The Midisynth circuit editor lets you pick the patch, which I think is interesting. So you could, like, theoretically modulate that and modulate through patches. It's something to play around with. And the Pro Editor gives you that option too, but you obviously can't modulate that in a performance setting like the Midisynth circuit editor does. These 4 areas, the pitch, decay, distort, and EQ, are all fixed modulation parameters within the circuit itself. So if I go to drum 1, these rows relate to those settings. So if I am looking at just drum 1, pitch is knob 1, so let me adjust that here. You can see it adjusting on the screen. Decay is knob 3, distortion is knob 5, and EQ is knob 7. These are covered in detail in the Novation circuit manual. I am going to cover those settings in detail when I do my hardware tutorial series, so I'm not going to focus on those a lot at this point. But it's good to know that you can adjust those parameters in the Midisynth circuit editor and the Pro editor in the session view mode. The last thing I want to point out is this section right here. This is not available in the Pro editor, and it took me a little bit to figure out what these are, but they are the panning. I think this is an overlooked aspect. This is a more recent addition to the Novation circuit, but you actually have the ability to pan the spectrum of sound on these for each instrument. And the way you access that is first you go to the mixer, and then you click octave up here. And it'll change the color of your instruments to blue. Now that means that you can pan them. So you can see here synth 1 is going to be macro knob 1. And if you look on the screen here, as I adjust, panning is going to full right. And if I adjust it left, panning is going full left. And you can do that for each of the instruments. So that just about covers it for the section, guys. I am going to be covering one more section with the Pro editor. And that is the random and morph functions here. And then I'm going to be focusing entirely on the Midisynth circuit editor. I just want to point out that Midisynth circuit editor just came out with an Android version of the application. So I'm going to make it a priority to cover the Midisynth circuit editor and all of the functionality that it comes with, because I have a feeling that a lot more people are going to be using it now that that availability is out there. All right, well, if you guys have any questions, please let me know, and I will see you in the next lesson. Thanks.